Welcome to NORRAG Podcast number 3. I'm your host for the show, Paul. In this episode, we continue talking to authors of the NORRAG book, Philanthropy in Education, Diverse Perspectives and Global Trends, published by Edward Elgar Publishing, Cheltenham, UK. The book was launched on 22nd November 2019 by NORRAG and the Al-Qasimi Foundation in the US and in the UK, and is free to download as an open access title on the NORRAG website at norrag.org and on elgaronline.com. You can find us on social media on Twitter at NORRAG, on Facebook at norrag.network, and the Al-Qasimi Foundation can be found on Twitter at Al-Qasimi Found. We talk today to Iván Matovich, co-author with Alejandra Cardini of New Philanthropy and Global Policy Networks in Education, the Case of Argentina, which is chapter 11 of the NORRAG book. Iván Matovich is coordinator of the education program at the Center for Implementation of Public Policies Promoting Equity and Growth, or CIPPEC, in Argentina. He is also an assistant professor of education policy at the Schools of Politics and Government of Austral University. Alejandra Cardini is Director of Education Program at CIPPEC. She also works as an educational policy professor at the School of Politics and Government of Austral University. Thank you for accepting to participate in this NORRAG podcast, Iván. So my first question is, what is your chapter about and why is the analyzed topic relevant?
Well, this chapter describes how new philanthropy and global networks have become more relevant in Argentina's education policy during the last years. Since a new administration took office in 2015, a significant political shift welcomed new political actors in Argentina, and I would say that this has become even a stronger movement in other Latin American countries. This context has raised new questions about those ways in which new philanthropy finds development, what we call development opportunities, even in an environment with a strong tradition of public education and non-pro-market conditions. Actually, this is the case of Argentina. So, taking into consideration what we usually call the who and how of education policy, and following obviously literature on new philanthropy and global policy networks, we in this chapter we examine how possible possible transformations and movements of people, ideas, money, and certain logics, and so this helps us to address this objective, and to address this objective, actually, we study the case of the Barkey Foundation. This organization is a very renowned international example of new philanthropy. And by asking how this organization managed to land in Argentina, we try to understand those ways in which this type of organizations, these new philanthropy organizations, expand and penetrate in new networks. So I would say that this topic is relevant for two main reasons. On one hand, this chapter allows drawing attention to a case which seems exceptional in this scenario of Argentina, and we're talking about an international foundation closely related to a for-profit educational company that has managed to begin operations in a country with a very strong public tradition, as I was saying before, and where there are low levels of pro-market development. So it is a good case to study from the theoretical point of view also. And on the other hand, I think that this chapter also evidences how certain nodal actors work out as boundary spanners, and they enable new logics to penetrate within the public sector. And it's this chapter may be relevant to understand how private actors join these type of networks as legitimators and catalyzers of these landing processes of new philanthropy organizations. And just maybe a third point to add to this list is that from a research perspective, this chapter works as an exercise to use research methods and theoretical frameworks that in general are produced in other contexts rather than the Latin American. So it's also a very good exercise for research to try and to use all these tools in another context.
And what is this new philanthropy?
Well, there is a big debate, and I'm sure that there are many definitions, and literature shows that there are many definitions. But in this particular chapter, we like to use a definition used by Simon Ball, or all the framework used that the Simon Ball uses along many of his work. So I think that philanthropy can no longer be thought as a funding transfer from the private to the public sector or as a charitable practice. So in this chapter, we take this definition that says that new philanthropy is the direct connection between giving and outcomes, and the direct involvement of giving in philanthropic action and policy communities with three main aims. So I think that these three main aims are key to understand the difference between philanthropy and new philanthropy. So one is bringing non-profits to scale by committing large blocks of funding over a long period of time. A second aim would be emphasizing the importance of evaluation and performance management. And a third one, fostering these investor-investee relationships on the basis of consultative engagement. So I think that this helps us to understand what might be this new phenomenon that is continuously changing. And just to add another characteristic is that new philanthropy has a big difference with philanthropy because it moves and blurs these boundaries between philanthropy, business, and the public sector. So I think that this characterization might work to understand what new philanthropy is.
Very interesting. And how do new philanthropy and global policy networks influence education policy at the national level? And what is the role of private actors in these networks?
Well, there are numerous pieces of research that evidence how new philanthropy and global networks have a strong influence at the national level. We believe that this chapter is one extra piece of evidence of this. And actually, in this piece of work, we remark the effects on governance as one of the most relevant aspects of new philanthropy. And here, I would say that philanthropic practices imply new models of governance, and as these actors circulate with their money, logics, values, and models throughout global policy networks, the educational policy arena is reconfigured. So at the end of the day, these new policy spaces are opened within what I was talking before about blurred sector boundaries, and new philanthropists operate in what Ball and Olmedo call a parapolitical sphere, where they can develop their own agenda. So in this sense, the public sector is generally being worked on and reworked by these new policy actors, the new philanthropic organizations, from the inside out, let's say in an endogenous change, and from the outside in this would be an exogenous change. So as I said, many of these new policy actors become and belong to the private sector. So here we can see what you were mentioning in the question, these changes in the national level that come from the relationships between new philanthropy and these policy networks. And this influence, I think the most important idea that can be taken, that can be concluded out of the chapter is that this influence is also evidence in how new philanthropy focuses on policy problem solving by the influx of these private actors' money, enterprises models, and all these private actors bring to the public field an alternative to a view based on a failing state. Just to conclude, I like what Marinucci's words. Marinucci is an author that works on this type of phenomena, and he says that we are now officially in the era of philanthropy entrepreneurs, where the difference between venture capital funds and a foundation, a hot startup, and social venture become totally blurry. And I would add to his words that all this is happening between blurred boundaries between the public and the private sector. So this becomes even more complex. So I think those are the consequences, or the main consequences of this type of phenomenon.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this adventure and your chapter, and for accepting to speak with NORRAG, and for your insights on the topic of philanthropy, or maybe I should say new philanthropy, in the Argentine context.
Okay, thank you very much.
And then see you all next time on the next NORRAG podcast, your podcast on global developments in education policies and practice.